History is supposed to be a record of what happened, but what if history is not a record at all? What if it is a version, a selection, a story shaped by those who survived, those who won, and those who decided what future generations were allowed to know? When you open a history book, you trust that what you are reading is true. But almost everything you know about the past passed through human hands, human power, and human control. And that is where the problem begins. Because history is not written by time. It is written by people. And people edit things long before modern governments, long before textbooks, long before printing presses. Ancient rulers understood one dangerous truth. Controlling the past means controlling the future. If you decide what people believe about where they came from, you decide what they believe is possible. So throughout history, evidence has been hidden, destroyed, rewritten, or ignored, not always in secret, sometimes in public, and sometimes in plain sight. Entire civilizations vanished from the story. As if they never existed, advanced knowledge appeared suddenly with no clear origin. Timelines were stretched, compressed, or cut to fit official narratives, and uncomfortable discoveries were labeled myths, mistakes, or coincidences, and once that label is applied, curiosity dies. Slowly. Archaeologists are taught early on that not every discovery is welcome. Some findings create problems because they do not fit the accepted timeline. They do not match what we think ancient humans were capable of. And when that happens, the evidence is not always celebrated. Sometimes it is locked away. Sometimes it is reinterpreted until it no longer threatens the story. Sometimes it simply disappears. One of the strongest signs that history was edited is how often ancient civilizations are described as primitive, even when the evidence says otherwise. Massive stone structures built with impossible precision, mathematical knowledge embedded in monuments, advanced understanding of astronomy and engineering, all appearing thousands of years before. They should, according to official timelines, instead of asking how this was possible, history often answers with one word: coincidence. Another sign is missing. Chapters entire periods where evidence suddenly becomes scarce. Knowledge disappears and progress seems to go backward. Historians call these dark ages, but darkness in history usually means darkness in records, not darkness in reality, because civilizations do not simply forget how to build, think, or organize overnight. Knowledge has to be lost, destroyed, or suppressed. To disappear on that scale, libraries burned, scrolls destroyed, temples dismantled, languages erased. When conquerors arrived, they did not just take land, they took memory, and they replaced it with their own version of events. Over time, that version became truth, not because it was accurate, but because it was repeated, and repetition creates belief. Another clue that history was edited is the sudden appearance of advanced ideas with no clear development. Writing systems, mathematics, calendars, medicine, and architecture often appear fully formed, as if downloaded into civilization, rather than slowly developed. Official explanations often rely on guesswork. But guesswork becomes fact. Once it is printed, enough times ancient maps show land masses that should not have been known. Coastlines that match modern surveys long before satellites existed. These maps are labeled anomalies or mistakes, even when the accuracy is undeniable. Ancient texts describe machines, flying objects, energy weapons, and global catastrophes. They are dismissed as myths, even when similar stories appear across cultures that never met the editing of history. It is not always about hiding truth. Sometimes it is about simplifying it. Complex stories are reduced to linear progress narratives. Humans were ignorant, then slowly became intelligent. But reality is rarely that clean. Civilizations rise, fall, and rise again. Knowledge is lost and rediscovered, not invented from nothing, yet the official. Story often removes these cycles because they complicate the idea of constant progress. Another sign is selective preservation. Some artifacts are displayed, celebrated, and studied. Others remain in storage for decades, unseen by the public, because they do not fit expectations. Museums hold far more than they show, and what they show shapes public understanding. The past you know is the past that was chosen for you, not necessarily the past that existed when evidence challenges authority. Authority responds by controlling interpretation. Discoveries are explained away, reclassified, or removed from discussion, not through conspiracy, but through institutions, peer review, funding, control, and academic pressure. Asking the wrong questions can end careers, so most people stop asking. Over time, silence becomes normal, and the edited version becomes history itself. This is not about one secret group rewriting everything. It is about power structures doing what power structures always do: protect stability, protect identity, and protect control. Because admitting that history was edited means admitting that our understanding of humanity is incomplete, and that idea is uncomfortable. Because if the past is uncertain, then the future is not guaranteed, and that realization changes how people think, behave, and question authority. History is not just about what happened, it is about what we are allowed to remember. And Part 1 ends with this simple truth. If history was never edited, we would not be arguing about it today. When you look deeper into the past, you start to notice patterns that do not feel accidental. Ancient knowledge appears suddenly across the world. Agriculture, astronomy, architecture, and mathematics emerge in multiple regions within similar time frames. Without clear communication between them, official history calls this independent development. But that explanation begins to feel weak when the similarities become too precise. Similar symbols, similar myths, similar measurements, similar stories of destruction and rebirth, carved into stone, told in oral traditions, and written into early texts across continents. Another sign is the way ancient catastrophes are treated. Global floods, sudden climate shifts, mass extinctions, and celestial events appear in mythologies worldwide, yet are often dismissed as symbolic, even though modern science now confirms that such events did occur when ancient people described fire from the sky, oceans swallowing land, and darkness covering the world. They were not necessarily imagining things, they were remembering, but memory, without official validation, becomes legend. And legend is easier to ignore than evidence. Timelines are another area where editing becomes visible. Official chronology is treated as fixed, but it is built on assumptions, carbon dating margins, interpretation of layers, and accepted sequences. When new discoveries challenge these timelines, they are often forced to fit rather than allowed to rewrite the model. Evidence that suggests civilizations may be older than believed is labeled controversial, even when data supports it, because changing timelines changes everything. It changes who we think we are, where we came from, and what we might be capable of again. Another quiet form of editing is translation. Ancient texts are translated by humans with biases, beliefs, and cultural filters. Words with multiple meanings are simplified. Complex ideas are turned into religious stories or poetic metaphors, and technical descriptions are dismissed as symbolic because it is easier than admitting ancient people may have understood more than we think. The destruction of knowledge is also well documented. Libraries burned, religious texts destroyed, scientific works erased because they contradicted dominant beliefs. Each time this happened, history lost pieces, and each time the winners wrote new versions to replace them over generations. These replacements became truth, not because they were complete, but because they were all that remained. Modern history, education reinforces this by teaching certainty, where uncertainty exists. Students are taught conclusions, not questions, and questioning official history is often framed as ignorance rather than curiosity. But real understanding comes from asking why something does not fit, why there are gaps, why so much ancient knowledge appears without origin, why similar symbols appear worldwide, why ancient engineering rivals modern capabilities, why entire cultures disappear from records, and why evidence that challenges the narrative is always explained away rather than explored. The idea that history was edited does not require believing everything was false. It requires accepting that what we know is incomplete, filtered, and shaped by human decisions, power struggles, and survival. Not truth alone. If history were a mirror, it would reflect everything, but instead, it reflects what was allowed to remain, and what remains tells a story that feels too clean, too linear, and too convenient. Civilizations do not move forward in straight lines. They rise, fall, forget, and remember. And yet, the official story rarely shows this because cycles are harder to control than progress, and progress is easier to sell. The most important evidence that history was edited is not hidden in secret vaults. It is visible in contradictions, missing links, unexplained achievements, and unanswered questions. The past keeps whispering through ruins, symbols, myths, and artifacts that do not fit. And every time we ignore those whispers, we participate in the editing ourselves. The final uncomfortable truth is this: if history was edited, then the version we live by may not be the full story. And if the full story were known, it might change how we see power, progress, identity, and the future. So the real question is not whether history was edited, but whether we are ready to accept what might be revealed if the edits were undone, and if tomorrow new evidence proved that humanity's past was far older, far more advanced, and far more complex than we were taught. Would we accept it, or would we edit the story again?